Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about the presidency of James K. Polk. So I always like to talk about James Polk because I figured through talking about Polk you can cover the Texas Revolution, the Mexican-American War, you can see Manifest Destiny, you can, cover the Mexican and American relationships, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, Manifest Destiny in action, and how do you judge presidents, right? So there's a lot of lessons to be learned about the presidency of James K. Polk. So today that's what we're gonna be covering, right? So let's get started. All right. So this is a map of the territories acquired during James Polk presidency, right? So James Polk is our 11th president of the United States, and he's one of the presidents that does the most to expand the territories of the U.S. He's gonna be responsible for annexing Texas, for getting the territory from the Mexican-American War, which is it's called the Mexican Cession, and the Oregon Territory. All right, all of it within one term presidency. Right, so he's kind of like a controversial president. At the same time, like I mentioned, there's a lot of lessons to be learned from his presidency, right? So if you remember from the last video I made from the Texas Revolution, I was talking about Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and how he lost Texas to the Texans, right? So it's always interesting in Mexican history that Santa Anna is considered one of their biggest villains, right? And in Mexico, they usually blame Santa Anna for losing Texas, for losing the Southwest territory, the Gadsden territory that they lose in 1853. So I usually offer an alternative explanation for Mexico losing so much territory, right? It's not just Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna losing quite a bit of it through the Texas Revolution, but it's rather also the work of James Polk, right? So James Polk is, the ultimate manifest destiny president, right? He's an expansionist, and he's a very aggressive expansionist, right? So in 1845, James Polk will, as opposed to other presidents, like the past presidents did not want to annex Texas because they figured it might cause a war with Mexico. But James Polk is an expansionist, right? He's not gonna care about that, right? So he will seek to annex Texas because that's as an expansionist, as a manifest destiny guy, that's one of his main goals, right? Annexing Texas, right? Now he's not going to be content with annexing Texas. He's also going to attempt to purchase California from Mexico. When Mexico refuses the option of selling California, what James Polk will do is quite honestly provoke a war with Mexico, right? He will basically send troops to what is present-day Brownsville, Texas, around here, and basically he's going to. This territory was disputed, right? When Texas was annexed, there was always kind of like a gray area into where the boundary of Texas was, right? Mexico argued the boundary was the Nueces River, which is here, whereas the Texans argued that the boundary was the Rio Grande, which is all these guys, right? So it makes a big difference whether you do Nueces or do the Rio Grande. So this was disputed territory. So what does James Polk do? He sends troops to Brownsville, Texas, to what is present-day Brownsville, and he basically provokes a war with Mexico, right? So this is what I mean by manifest destiny in action, right? He's an expansionist, and he doesn't care about provoking a war with Mexico because in his mind, this is the best for Americans, right? This is the best result for the American people, right? This is manifest destiny. In other words, the way he sees it is that this will, if you remember the concept of manifest destiny, American values, progress, modernization, technology, democracy, all those things that come with American values in the 1800s, you know, James Polk sees it as a justification, and again, justifying a war with Mexico, justifying relocation of Indians, basically justifying whatever, right? Just so we can continue expansion because we feel it's the best thing, is the best case scenario for everyone, right? Kind of like in a way like we're improving mankind, right? So is manifest destiny justification for provoking a war with Mexico? The answer was yes, right? So through James Polk, we're going to annex Texas. The boundary dispute and the Mexican-American War is going to give the U.S. all this territory. And basically the idea is that, it's justified. It's justified because we're going to do better with that territory than whatever Mexico is going to do, right? And the other thing is that James Polk is very aware that Mexico can't fight back, right? He's very aware that, Mexico hasn't even been able to reclaim Texas back, much less they're going to be able to fight off an American army, right? So they are, in essence, provoking a weaker nation, knowing that they can't fight back, right? So when people use Santa Anna as this kind of like, Santa Anna lost us Texas, that is true to an extent, because although Santa Anna did lose the Texas Revolution in quite a, excuse my language, in quite a stupid way, at the same time, those treaties of Velasco were never really ratified in Congress, right? So from 1836 to 1845, the Republic of Texas was never really, accepted in Mexico, right? They never recognized the independence of Texas. Mexico always wanted to get that territory back, right? So Santa Anna did lose the revolution, but the treaties of Velasco had no validity in Mexico, all right? Santa Anna did go back to power and also becomes the person that loses the Mexican-American War. But to be honest, this was an unwinnable war for Mexico, right? Probably not even Napoleon Bonaparte would have won this war. Mexico was thoroughly unmatched for this war. So kind of like blaming Santa Anna for it seems a mistake. It's more about, James Polk being an expansionist, right? Taking advantage of the situation, right? The other part that James Polk ends up adding to the American territory is this part that says Oregon country, right? So the Oregon territory was shared with England, but towards this time, manifest destiny, right? So James Polk is going to support people moving all the way to Oregon, and basically try to populate it as much as possible so we can take it from the English, right? We're not going to pay anything. We're just basically going to take it. And what James Polk will do is kind of sort of threaten the English with war. All right. So he used the slogan 5440 or fight. 5440 or fight basically means the 5440 parallel, which is somewhere out here. You don't see the entire map, but it's somewhere out here. He actually wanted the entire territory and a little bit of chunk of land that you can't hear, but it's eventually going to settle for the 49th parallel, which is basically this one, right? The one that we have today. So all of this land was added to the American territory by James Polk, right? So again, like I mentioned, there's a lot to learn from this, from seeing Manifest Destiny in action to understanding the perspective of Mexico, and in a way trying to see that, is Santa Anna really the responsible person for losing all this territory, or is it actually, James Polk who's basically pushing for expansion. It's probably a combination of both of them, right? I just find it interesting that in Mexico they always see it as if it wasn't because of Santa Anna, like things would be different, right? And I always beg to disagree with that, right? Santa Anna or not Santa Anna, with James Polk at the helm of the U.S., expansion was their number one goal, and a war would have happened, right? They would have provoked a war regardless, right? So again, from Manifest Destiny to the Mexican American relations to Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna to Texas Revolution, Mexican American War, you can learn a lot about history of this point through the presidency of James Polk, right? So it brings to the other very important question, which is how do you judge precedents, right? Because for the most part today, considering all the territorial acquisitions, you would think that James Polk would be considered up there with, for example, Jefferson, someone who's in the top 5, top 10 presidents of the U.S., and he's never ranked up there, right? Because he's controversial, right? Because of the methods of acquisition of the territory, right? So the question is James Polk a good president or is he a bad president, right? And I always find interesting that his presidency brings all the different topics and all these different conversations to be had about our history, right? So I don't want to take much more of your time. This was the presidency of James Polk, and I'll see you guys around. Be safe.